And perhaps this is the most important question, always, that I think we need to ask more, is who is benefiting from that, from a policy, from a theory? A neoclassical approach would, let's say, free market, like you said, recommend smaller state intervention. Who do you think is benefiting? Social sciences, different than natural sciences, we don't have a universal truth. We don't have like a universal law that guides the rule of the universe like you have in physics or chemistry, right? Because different than atoms or particles like electrons, our unit is human beings. We should not accept one equation as the universal truth of economics. So as Hyman Minsky said, everyone can create money. The problem is to get it accepted.
Our guest today is Dr. Matheus Vianna. He is an economist and lecturer at the University of Manchester who has written a number of publications around economic and environmental policies. We will dive into his academic journey, his paper on why Bitcoin isn't money, the post-Keynesian perspective, and the importance of pluralism in the field. Before we get into the main bit, I just wanted to hear a bit about yourself, your own experiences, and I'm aware this is like, there's also the perspective of like teaching in a new country, because you studied originally in Brazil.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how's that experience?
That was a nice experience, a big shock, let's say, initially. But yes, my name is Matheus, or in Portuguese, Matheus. You can call me Matt, however you want to call me. I actually did all my studies back in Brazil. I'm Brazilian, did all my studies in Rio de Janeiro. Did my undergrad, master's, and PhD, everything in economics at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And after I finished my PhD in 2021, I joined the University of Manchester as a lecturer. And yeah, as a matter of fact, it was a big shock in the beginning, like teaching in another language, but also being in a different country, experiencing different backgrounds from the students and even their perspectives and the number of students. Like I've never taught a class with 200 students before coming here. So that was a very good experience. Now I'm pretty pretty comfortable with the scenario here. So yeah, but in the beginning it was a long process of learning and adjustment.
How was your first lecture? So your first lecture with 200 students, how did that go?
It's funny, before the lecture starts, you get really nervous, especially because initially I thought the English language would be my biggest problem, like the students wouldn't understand me. But as a matter of fact, I don't think that was the biggest issue. And today I do not struggle with the language. I still don't have a perfect English, but I don't think it's a problem. But once you start the lecture, you don't realize that it's an issue. You simply go and all the nervousness go away. So yeah, I think it was more intimidating before it started, but once it started, it was a normal teaching experience.
I guess you could find like comfort in knowing that all these students are all just mostly worried about their grades than anything else.
Yeah. Also, like before coming here, I thought I didn't know how many international students we had. So I initially thought I was going to teach most of British students, but as a matter of fact, we are teaching more international students than national ones. So everyone is basically on the same place as I am, learning a different language, learning a different culture, and living a different experience.
Why economics?
So I guess I'll give the common answer that I do ask this question to my students, and most of them do answer a similar answer. Like, I wanted to get rich, get some money and work on the financial sector or banks. But studying where I studied at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, I did learn that economics was not what I initially expected and was something completely different. I really learned how to love it the way it is, and I continued to study economics in my master's and PhD, but from a different perspective. I became a much more academic with perhaps with social and political interests as well, not only financial gains.
You know, there's like this like state statistic that like most students don't actually end up doing economics. They go to other like disciplines. So what made you want to? What sparked the decision to go into academia and like research and not like a corporate job?
I guess it was my initial internships and experience I had during my undergrad. So I did have a choice. There was a moment in my life that I got approved for 2 internships at the same time. One was for the Brazilian National Development Bank, which is a big institution and one of the most well-paid internship for economists in the country. And the other one was on a very small research-focused think tank. And I actually opted to go to the small think tank because the area in the development bank that I was selected to was something that I wasn't very interested about at the moment, was to work on energy and electricity, which I did some research in my very first year of my undergrad, and actually came back to studying it in the past year. But at that moment I didn't want to work with that, so I went to the small think tank, which was very research focused, and I guess that shaped my academic life, I suppose, because that's what I learned to do. Work with research.
Special about that think tank, they shaped your, you'd say, like, academic life?
They had a very interesting take, and I suppose we're going to talk about it in a couple of minutes, but they had a very strong Post-Keynesian perspective on their research. And they also had very strong international relationship with international scholars coming to discuss and present stuff, organizing conferences, and I thought that was an interesting opportunity at that moment. I started as a assistant researcher, later became researcher and executive coordinator of the institution, but then the institution closed.
Interesting you mentioned that, because we're going to be talking about post-Keynesianism, the post-Keynesian school of thought, and cryptocurrency. But before that, I asked this question to the last guest as well. But if you had a dinner party and you could invite 3 guests from all over history, dead or alive, and they had to be economists, who would be on your list?
I think my answer is very easy, because before I answer it, my PhD thesis combined the work of 3 specific economic approaches from 3 specific economic thinkers. So I suppose my answer would be those 3. So Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, Mikhail Kalecki, and Joseph Schumpeter.
So Keynes I've heard of.
Yes, British economist, very famous. Mikhail Kalecki, it's a Polish economist, which wasn't as famous as Keynes because most of his publish was in Polish. Only later in his career he published in English. He was invited to work in the UK by Keynes himself. And Joseph Schumpeter is well known as well, right? It's Austrian economist.
Now into the world of cryptocurrency. So I read your paper. You wrote a paper and your title was Why Bitcoin is Not Money. So in layman terms, for someone who, say, has never done economics in their life, but they would know what Bitcoin is. It's all over the news. It's everywhere. Could you tell us, explain to us, what is cryptocurrency?
So I guess a more general definition would instead be crypto assets instead of cryptocurrencies, right? Because it's not a currency, it's not money as my paper proposes, because it's not a liability of anyone, it's not a debt, right? So for instance, money is money because it is a liability of the state, with us. Right? The state owe us some money, and that's what gives value to money. Instead, crypto assets, I would argue it is like a commodity. It's like a good, any good, okay? Like gold or corn or any good that has its price fluctuating based on demand and supply and everything. The point is, we can use goods, we can use commodities to record assets and liabilities, including debt and money. So for instance, in the past, we did use gold coins to record the state debt towards us. Today, we don't use goods anymore. What do we use? Just numbers in digital accounts, in your bank statement, right? So you have money just because there is a number there recording the debt that the state or the bank has to you. You don't actually need a physical token of that liability. Yeah. Well,
so does the definition of money change? Because back in the day when gold was used to exchange, like buy and sell things, would that have been classed as money?
No, the definition didn't change. Gold was only a token for a liability. But what gives value to money, what is considered money, is because someone owes someone else that amount. The only thing is that they record that amount in a gold coin, or in a paper check if you want, or in a wooden tally stick that people used to use like centuries ago. Today, we just record those transactions in digital balance sheets. Right? We don't need the physical things anymore. So cryptocurrencies are very much like commodities, but in a digital world. Of course, they use a cryptographic system to enable security and allow anonymity, but they are not a liability from someone to someone else. So they are not money. They don't have value as money. They do, of course, change their price and then can be traded. Okay, they could value more or less, and you can trade them. But just like any other asset, you can trade gold, you can trade oil, you can trade whatever you want. But we still don't use oil or gold as money. You can use gold to record the value of money, but gold itself, it's not money.
Could the same be said about money then? Because we trade money for currencies, right? Different like foreign exchange. Yeah,
but then it's a bit more complex when we're talking about the international monetary system, because countries need one specific, in particular, most countries need one specific currency to trade their goods and services. In our world today is dollars, right? So US dollars. So they need that to do their transactions, right? But what gives value to money in a national level, so for instance in the UK, is the fact that the state is issuing a debt, is issuing a liability. When you hold a pound note, this is only a way to record the fact that the state owes you £5 or £10. You could record this in a physical metallic coin, or in a paper banknote, or digitally in your bank account.
But what do they actually owe us?
Trust. What gives value to money is trust. So as Hyman Minsky said, everyone can create money. The problem is to get it accepted. So I can create my money. I can create my own paper notes, called Matheus's, and say that you owe me 5 Matheuses, right? But I need to create value to it. And only the state has one particular power to create value, in particular demand for its money. What do you think it is?
That's a good question. Is there the ability to, enforce?
Exactly. Yeah. In particular, economically, they can enforce by having taxes, by making you pay taxes. So, and you need to pay taxes in their specific money that they issued. So taxes create demand for the money that they issue.
Oh, wow.
Right? And what gives value to it, why do we, of course, okay, that is one condition, that if we don't pay taxes, we go to jail, so we need to get state money. But what gives value to it is the fact that we trust the state as this institution, public institution, and we trust that the paper note that records that debt will continue to have value.
What if you don't trust the state?
Then you create problems. Then if you don't trust the state, then this could create hyperinflation, or this could create could lead to migration to a different currency, like in some countries that they stopped using the national currency and started using US dollars as but this is because they don't trust the national currency issuer, and this is what gives value to money.
And I was always curious about this. So say for the United States, when another country adopts a dollar, does that benefit the country of the United States? Or is that just, they just use the same currency, but...
Well, who do you think benefits?
Banks?
Yeah, but in international terms, who do you think it's benefiting more? The US or the country that adopted this?
US.
Yeah, because now they have other countries that are demanding their currency that only they can issue. Right, so this puts a lot of power in the US state, because they basically control the demand and consequently the supply of money internationally.
So what could you do with that? Like, what could they do with that kind of power?
Oh, it's more like political influence power, right? But also economically, because if they do any, and you know that if they do any kind of economic policy, let's say monetary policy, if they increase the interest rate nationally, this will affect the other countries, especially the ones that really heavily rely on the US dollar. But just a disclaimer, this is not the common approach to money. This is not the common notion of money, right? If you probably have taken any course on macroeconomics or monetary economics, you learn that money is anything that people use to facilitate transactions, like the common history that we moved from the barter economy that needed a double coincidence of wants, and then we as a society chose one good to be the unit of account, let's say gold. But historically and anthropologically, there is no record of such thing. Money was always, historically, in every society and anthropologically, a creature of the state, or at least of those who were in power at a certain point. So it wasn't ever like this theoretical fable that we are in a barter economy, then let's choose something like water bottles or gold or anything to facilitate our trades. That even though that this story makes sense, there is no historical anthropological records of this.
So consider a world where, like, obviously Bitcoin's just an example, but there's other cryptocurrencies which are arguably more developed, or the thinking behind it is more developed. Consider, like, would there be a possibility where countries actually in the future switch to cryptocurrencies?
So that was actually my biggest concern when I started studying it. So back in 2017, when it was the first big wave of popularity, and when the Bitcoin price went up, everyone was talking about it. Even my non-economist friends were talking about it, and some of them were actually saying like, "Oh, eventually we're going to replace our national currency with Bitcoin, and it's going to be much better." And I said, "Okay, something is wrong here. Something is not right. I need to understand this." And of course, I started to study it from a Post-Keynesian perspective, because it was very clear from a Post-Keynesian perspective that Bitcoin wasn't money. Okay, so it is very unlikely, as it still is, that a country would adopt a cryptocurrency, or Bitcoin in particular, as its currency. Only very small nations that I wouldn't consider relevant. So it's very unlikely for this to happen, because by doing so, the country would lose one of its most important and powerful macroeconomic tools, monetary policy. To stabilize the economy, they need to use monetary policy, or by changing the supply of money, or by changing the interest rate, to help to stabilize the economy. And if you don't control the issuance and the supply of your national currency, you lose monetary sovereignty. It's just like changing and moving to a international or foreign currency. So if a country adopts the US dollar, they will lose this power. Or if they adopt a supranational currency, they individually, those countries will lose power. Do you know any example of a supranational currency adopted by several countries at the same time?
Europe.
Oh yeah. So unfortunately, people would argue that for some countries it's good because they have the stability of the euro, but individually they lose at least this very important macroeconomic tool that they have at their disposal.
I mean, since they're based on algorithms, would you reckon it's a possibility that, say, some really intelligent people devise a cryptocurrency that doesn't fluctuate, that, like, there's a constant supply, relatively stable?
You know who are developing this?
Who?
Central banks.
That's actually really interesting. Why are central banks developing it?
Because, Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies did bring a revolution, but I would say it's more like a technological revolution than an economic revolution. Like the blockchain mechanism is indeed a very interesting mechanism to record information, to guarantee safety, anonymity. So what happens now is that some central banks are developing their own crypto or digital currencies, right? So they are using those technologies, but still, it's just like a banknote, it's just like a coin. It's still a debt that the state is issuing, but it's now recorded in this crypto system, which is much more safe and better than like a paper note that you can tear apart. Social sciences, different than natural sciences, we don't have a universal truth. We don't have like a universal law that guides the rule of the universe, like you have in physics or chemistry, right? Because different than atoms or particles like electrons, our unit is human beings. Human beings make mistakes, they change their minds, they interact with others, they learn, they evolve, right? They are not simply atoms that go to one place or the other. So social sciences are much more complex. We don't have universal truths. And as scientists, as economists, we are not in search of a universal truth. We are in search of a better theory that better explains the economic, social, political process that we live in this current scenario. The social, economic, and political context, they do change. They do change in time, and theories change in time accordingly, because they try to explain different situations, different countries, different periods of time, right? So we have to be very careful in assuming that one theory or economic theory is able to explain everything, and this is going to be like the quantity theory of money, right? Yeah, it does explain money 200 years ago. It's not what we have now. So the theories must change. We should not accept one equation as the universal truth of economics. It's an identity, but the equation, the causality behind the theoretical mechanism behind might not necessarily be the same. And to go a little bit further, I would say that since theories are not perfect representation of realities, but they do have strong policy implications, theories can be used by the dominant classes, by the dominant people in that current situation, the current country in that current time. Choosing one theory over the other is much more a political choice than a scientific choice.
That's pretty interesting. And to what extent do you think that's actually relevant today? with the theories we learn.
Definitely.
It's really interesting.
We need to really be careful because ideas in general, not only theories, but theories are formalization of a set of ideas. But ideas, every idea is a product of the dominant groups, right? The dominant ideas, the clothes we use, what do we do, what do we value in a society. We might think it's our notion, our values or our ideas, but they are not. They were actually byproducts of the dominant groups, people, and institutions today.
So who benefits from neoclassical economics being the mainstream approach?
Who do you think benefits? If I'm not saying that every theory is necessarily correlated with political spectrums, but they do have political implications. So what I'm saying is that we also need to be careful not to assume that every neoclassical economist is, for instance, right-wing, and every heterodox economist is, for instance, left-wing. No, you can have left-wing, politically left-wing individuals in a neoclassical theoretical framework and vice versa. Okay, but we have to really, and perhaps this is the most important question always that I think we need to ask more, is who is benefiting from that, from a policy, from a theory? Who is gaining from that implication and who is losing? This is always the key question. It's not a perfect game, so someone is always losing, someone is always benefiting, and we also need to consider this. So I would say that if, in general, a neoclassical approach would, let's say, free market, like you said, recommend smaller state intervention, who do you think is benefiting? The individuals that don't have job, that live on the street, that are starving and dying in the cold winter, or the ones who are already living in their luxurious flats and mansions that don't need the state money, that they can pay for the public service, education, health. That they don't need to pay for the public education, that they can pay for their private education, health, and everything. So who do you think is benefiting from that?
That's a great point. And I guess you could say, I mean, in many cases, they are the people who have the power to change or put these ideas in place.
And even if they are not explicitly empowered, those are the ones who have influence and money to lobby or to influence actual policies or change the views of the congressman if they want to shift a policy towards their business or not towards another sector. That can easily be done. That's what's done in reality.
So transitioning or linking to the idea of like the curriculum. I mean, one of my previous guests actually, he mentioned the power of like campaigning as a collective, having that kind of bargaining power. When you're more than one person, you're able to kind of do much more. So on that basis, how would you suggest or how would you navigate this kind of heterodox approach in a kind of environment where there's one dominant or one or two dominant kind of?
That's a difficult question. Perhaps from the questions you originally sent, that was the most difficult to answer in my mind, because it's not hard, it's not easy to navigate. You are sometimes, like your peers, they don't even know what you're talking about. Like if I mention the effective demand principle or uncertainty of liquidity preference, like basic Post-Keynesian definitions to a colleague of mine in the department that doesn't know, he will not even be able to communicate. So we do have this big communication issue between different approaches. It's really hard for them to communicate, and it's really hard for someone to learn something different from what they are already used to do. Right. So it's not an easy task to communicate. So I always try to conciliate things, even theoretical assumptions, like in my PhD thesis that I did conciliate three different perspectives. Sometimes it's impossible to conciliate things, but I always try to do that because I think this at least reduces the communication issues, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
So, actually, when you, as a lecturer, I'm sure, like, you're the curriculum you're teaching. Has there ever been a case where you felt like you disagree with what you're teaching?
Every time.
Really?
Every time.
So how do you go about, like, because I'm wary that mentioning different viewpoints in an economics classroom can be confusing.
Yes, yeah, I guess so. But look, disagreement is good, right? So if I disagree with what I'm teaching, this is a good thing. And the students should disagree as well. Should at least question.
Yeah.
They can agree, but they should at least question the assumptions, or is there any alternative perspective, or what are the implications of this, or is this really representing our world? You can still agree, but disagreement is a good thing. Okay, so that's why I argue it's important to have pluralism. It's important to have different schools of thought. The issue is how they communicate. If they don't communicate, they cannot agree or disagree. They simply don't communicate.
Yeah.
But to agree or disagree, they need to communicate. Right? Debates, disagreements, they are an important part. So it's absolutely fine for me as a lecturer to disagree with what I'm teaching, but it's even more important for the students to disagree, at least to criticize what they're learning.
Oh, that's a really powerful point. Before we enter our concluding remarks, so one thing I'm trying to do for every interview is ask the interviewer to provide a question for the next person. So without knowing who that next person is, what's one thing you'd like to know from them?
Related to economics?
Anything, absolutely anything.
I think it's going to be somehow related to economics. But I would ask, what would that person think that as a society we are doing wrong? What we are doing wrong as a society? And what do we need to change? What do we need to do better?
Over to you now. What would your answer be?
To my own question?
Your own question.
Oh, okay. I think we are doing a lot of things wrong. So, just to give the space for the next interview to answer, I would say that one of the main things, obviously, that we are doing wrong today is taking care of our world, our environment, obviously. So we need to consider this in how we learn, how we teach, how we discuss our economic things. We need to consider the environment. And for me, the other thing that we really need to do better is to deal with inequality. I think that's perhaps one of the most important social, political, economic problems that we live today. And sometimes just swept down the carpet. We don't even discuss it. Say, yeah, inequality, but we don't actually do anything, and we actually need to do something. That's at least my view.
So I'll ask you the question, the previous.
Okay.
You can hear it from her yourself.
Something that has marked their journey would being at Manchester, either as a student or as a lecturer, that they think they've made an impact on them that will carry on with them for their foreseen journey, either a student or in their lecturing journey. Okay, what do they think that is that thing that really made an impact on their life? And it could be academically related or personal related, a person that they met. Or
I guess there will always be one lecturer, one professor that changes your perspective. Like, in my case, I remember specifically one lecturer who became my PhD supervisor later, but he was already in an old age. He used to teach on Mondays 7 a.m. And most of the people, of my colleagues, my students, wouldn't like as much the topic. The topic was very hard. On a Monday, 7 a.m., from a relatively old man. It was pretty boring for most of my colleagues. But I went to every single class because the way he communicated, the way he connected his ideas, his words, he wasn't very engaging or I don't know, performatic, but intellectually, the way he connected those ideas changed my mind. So academically, I think that was my tipping point, let's say. It was when I realized that economics wasn't just getting money in the financial sector, and it was actually something else. What I think it is today, what I have been talking about in the last hour. So perhaps one day, I hope, my one student will have the same click from my lecture. I don't think I'm as brilliant as my PhD supervisor is, but hopefully I'm still a young, relatively young lecturer. I've been here for 2 years only. I don't know if I had clicked someone else's mind already. Perhaps I'll never know, right? Because even if I click, maybe they will never tell me. I'll never get in touch again. But if that was a tipping point for me, I hope this will happen to another student, in that case, me being the lecturer. Let's see.
That's a really inspiring answer. And as the final question, I just want to wrap up. I want to ask you, what's one thing or one or two things you would like people who watch this episode to take home with them?
Always question what you are taught. Never assume that everything is universal truth. Always go deeper. To question is to think, right? So cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Actually, I question, therefore I am. So always have this feeling that do not accept what you are told. Always think that might be a different answer or something might not be right. Always have this question in mind. That's one thing I would say for whoever is listening to this.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much, and I'm sure people watching this will too as well. So yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I was very nervous in the beginning, but I really enjoyed. In the end, I was able to talk a lot of things that I like to talk. So thank you very much for that. I hope whoever is listening, watching to this will learn something.